Well, the song goes, it's 5 o'clock somewhere, and here in New Jersey, it's 5 o'clock Friday afternoon, heading into a holiday weekend. Today was actually the federal version of the Independence Day holiday. Tomorrow, of course, is the 4th of July Independence Day, and the fireworks have been going off every night for the last 3 or 4 weeks leading up to this, which are just absolutely lovely if you're trying to sleep and trying to keep the dogs from going crazy too. Hope you've had a great week. I'm Mark Gillespie in the WhiskyCast studio in Haddonfield, New Jersey. It's time for our weekly roundtable with a bunch of whiskey writers and bloggers and just fun folks from around the world. We have a great lineup for you today. Before we start, though, I do want to give you a quick update. If you watched the Whiskey Wednesday webcast, we had George Grant Jr. from Glenfarclas on the show, and I have to point out that we were supposed to have him on, but I have to acknowledge that George was not able to make it with us on Wednesday because of weather issues that affected his internet connections up in Speyside in Scotland. He was not able to join us. We have confirmed, though, that he will be rejoining us or try to join us again this time on this coming Wednesday, July 8th. We'll also be joined on our Whiskey Wednesday webcast by Brendan McCarran of Ardbeg and Glenmorangie. He is Bill Lumsden's number 2 and in charge of overseeing all the maturing whiskey stocks for both Ardbeg and Glenmorangie distilleries. So we will have another fun panel coming up on the Whiskey Wednesday webcast. In the meantime, let's bring in our panel for today. On the upper right, the one and only whiskey bard of Scotland, Robin Laing. We also have Richard Woodard, who was most recently of ScotchWhiskey.com, has written for Decanter, The Drinks Business, other whiskey publications, and Billy Abbott, our pal from the Whiskey Exchange and running their blog and all their web content out of London. Gentlemen, how are we doing today?
Very good, thank you, Mark.
Rocking on.
Let's start off with what's in your glasses. And Robin, go ahead. What's in your glass today?
I have a 16-year-old Port Charlotte from a port cask. It's a special bottling by Malts of Scotland, and it's called Robin Laing's Bogeyman Inspiration. Picture of me wearing sunglasses, and Thomas Evers thought that I looked like a bogeyman with my black shirt and my sunglasses, so that's why he called it Bogeyman Inspiration. But it is a fantastic 16-year-old Port Charlotte, spent its whole life in a port cask.
Billy, what do you have in your glass?
Well, outside of this beer I have here, which is a very nice beer from the lovely people at Verdant, I have here in an appropriate glass and everything. I have a whiskey from my local distillery, Bimber. This is their most recent release. This is a single ex-bourbon cask. My video's disappeared. I'll come back in a second. There we go. And yeah, so this distillery, I can practically see them if I look out the window at the moment. Well, not the moment because it's dark and there's a helicopter flying around. But yeah, so it's a single ex-bourbon cask, distilled and aged in northwest London. So, cheers.
And Billy, weren't you saying before we started that you can see the Bimber distillery from your window?
Pretty much. They've built a couple of warehouses, and there's this place called the Whiskey Exchange that's in the way as well. But apart from that, I can pretty much see the distillery out my window. So it's about 15-20 minute walk away down the road.
And Richard, what's in your glass?
I've got some red spots, so I'm drinking Irish. So we've managed to include 3 different countries. I was going to drink local as well, and do have a bottle of Norfolk Parched from the English Whiskey Company, but it appears to have evaporated, unfortunately, so I've gone for this instead.
Those angels, they get you every time.
I know.
I decided to pour a blend, reached back into the cabinet and got the Chivas Regal Altus in honor of Colin Scott, who retired officially this week at Chivas Brothers. It was the 5th Chivas Regal Master Blender, and this was his creation, a blended malt. So I thought we would try that. And Sláinte, gentlemen, good to have you on the show today.
Thanks
for having us.
Let's talk about what you've been up to recently. Robin, I know you haven't been doing a lot of gigs recently, but what have you been working on?
I've been making an indentation on the grass in the garden. We had such lovely weather all the way through April and May. First time in my life the garden has been under control. Normally it's a firefighting exercise, but I've had so much time to spend in the garden that it's reasonably under control, apart from the rabbits, which are a pest and they eat everything that I've planted. But on the other hand, it's nice to have a bit of wildlife around as well. Work-wise, I've had no gigs, as you can imagine. It's, musicians are really struggling just now. Anybody in the entertainment business is struggling. We're beginning to see maybe some light at the end of the tunnel. I know I have some gigs organized for early September in Switzerland, and keeping my fingers crossed that those will still go ahead. On the other hand, a whiskey festival in Germany that I should have been attending is going to have to be done online. So to be honest, I don't think I'm going to miss the traveling and the flying. I'd be quite happy if I never have to fly again. That's just, there's something about being in that confined space with all these people and all the germs get spread around and recycled, and, you know, I don't want to get too paranoid about it, but I've enjoyed having the beautiful spring here at home and getting used to it. I'm beginning to think about retiring, actually, you know, putting my feet up.
We're not going to let you retire just yet, Robin. I have to ask about the travel thing. How many times have the airlines broken your guitars in travel?
They've lost it a couple of times, and it didn't arrive until, you know, 2 or 3 days later. It's only been broken once. The guitar was broken once, and the case was broken another time. But mostly I'm on short haul flights to Europe, and if it's at all possible, I do it in one flight, you know, not 2 flights through Frankfurt or Amsterdam or Paris. These are the situations where it normally gets messed up.
Just a reminder to everybody watching at home, you can put your comments and questions in the various chat rooms and question and answer areas on both Facebook, Periscope, and on YouTube, and we'll see them here. If you're watching us on Twitter, don't do a reply to the tweet, because we will not see that one until after the show ends. Richard, what have you been up to lately? It has been a while since ScotchWhisky.com went to the web server in the sky, and I know you've been trying to keep busy since then. What have you been up to?
I've been doing some writing, probably not as much writing as I would like, but since lockdown, a lot of writing about COVID, probably like a lot of my colleagues, and even more homeschooling since I have a 6-year-old son. So yeah, the homeschooling for me includes things like Lego and watching educational DVDs like Harry Potter. I think that's all on the national curriculum now. So yeah, just trying to keep busy, not just writing about whiskey, but writing about wine and writing about champagne and all other spirits as well. So yeah, that's me really.
So are you having fun teaching them to read?
Fun might be stretching things slightly.
I was being facetious.
Yeah. The maths has been quite good. He's definitely got a talent for the maths side of things, which is definitely not something he got from me. I can say that in all honesty. But I don't know, it's been a lot of fun, and we have been blessed with wonderful weather here through lockdown. So that's something.
Billy, what have you been doing? I know you've been running all the content and all the tastings for Whiskey Exchange, but what else have you been keeping up with?
It's just been really busy in general. At work, we do tastings every week, and so we had Mark on last night hosting a tasting for us. And outside of that, I've helped out with a few charity tastings online, but also just been helping people find each other. I know lots of people in the whiskey world, and lots of people trying to organise stuff during lockdown. So people have been sort of dropping me a line and saying, "Do you know someone who can do this?" And so there's loads of really interesting projects sort of deriving from the fact that people are at home, people aren't going out, people don't have the normal things they're doing. So people are thinking up interesting things and sort of like, going out and doing things that we wouldn't normally see. And it's really interesting to see those things develop.
Well, let me throw the first question out really for Billy and Richard, because being south of the Hadrian's Wall, all hell breaks loose tomorrow, doesn't it?
Yes.
6 a.m.
Reopen.
At 6 a.m. tomorrow morning.
Yeah. Now, unfortunately, I have an appointment at the local Apple store to have my phone fixed. It's very annoying. I can't hear people when they phone up. It's a horrible situation. It seems like the perfect solution for a telephone for me, but I need to get it fixed. So I have to walk down to the local Apple store, and it's right next door to about 4 or 5 pubs, which are all going to be open. So I'm just trying to work out exactly what my strategy is for dodging crowds, which is something I've not had to do for the last 3 or 4 months. So it'll be an interesting day.
Yeah, gotta wear the mask, right?
Well, I have my mask collection all ready to go, so that's all good. So a big mask to cover the beard and everything. So it's taken a while to sort one, but now I'm planning to actually do a pickup order at the local Brewdog bar, and literally run in, masked up, grab some beer, wave hello to all the people I haven't seen for 3 or 4 months, because actually about 6 months since I last went in there. Grab some beer, grab some chicken wings, and then wave as I run out the door again, avoiding as many crowds as I can. So it's a very weird thing where we want to try and support the pubs at the same time as most people don't necessarily want to go into the pub. It's trying to get that balance right at the moment. It's going to be the fun thing over the coming weeks.
Richard, how long do you think it's going to be before you feel comfortable going into the local?
I don't know. Sometime, I think. I think it depends on the pub. I think if the weather's good and there's a good pub garden, a good outdoor space, then you're going to feel a bit more comfortable. But the idea of going into a kind of inner city boozer where we all know what they're like, we all know how confined they are, that is going to take a heck of a long time, I think. So,
what? Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think a nice country pub where you can sit outside and have table service, I don't think I'd have a problem with that right now. But I wouldn't go there tomorrow. That's for sure.
Robin, it's going to be a couple more weeks at least, I think, before things open up a little bit in Scotland. Last I heard was July 15th was when the government's going to allow at least some indoor dining in pubs. So, give me your take on how you think things have gone up in Scotland with handling COVID.
Well, it all seems a little bit complicated and sometimes contradictory, but my impression is that the statistics and the figures show that Scotland seems to have done a pretty good job on reducing the threat from the virus, and they're very keen. The government here is very keen not to let it spring back and have a second spike or a second wave. I think people are trying not to make a political party thing out of it, but it's quite difficult with Boris Johnson in charge down south. We're a little bit behind as far as opening up pubs and restaurants. I was up at my friend Derek Mather's place in Artisan in Wishaw today, and he's decorating and putting up plastic screens and everything. It's not going to be the same, and I think it's important for the Scottish. The Scottish culture is very pub driven, if you like. It's like Ireland. Pubs are fundamental. For me personally, I don't want to go anywhere near a pub. I would rather sit in the garden or the house with a few friends and, have a little bit of sensible conversation. And I'm getting old, and I find the noise in a pub means that I can't really pay attention to what people are saying to me. So also, I live in a rural area, so if I want to go to a pub, I either have to walk quite a long distance in the dark or drive, and then then you're drinking Brewdog Nanny State or something like that. So I'm not a pub goer, I'm afraid, so I'm not going to miss it. But I do feel it's important for the culture in Scotland.
Well, the only time you go into pubs is when you're performing in them, right?
Pretty much, yeah.
It had to have been really gutting to not be able to go to Isla for the Phage back in May, because I know you're there every year performing at Platty.
Yeah, that's right. It was difficult. I did a couple of things online one for the festival itself, and also for Bruichladdich on their open day. They were really trying to put something out to make people feel that at least they can look through a window onto Islay rather than be there in person. But I really missed it. But we're going for a family holiday to Islay a week tomorrow. So that's something to look forward to. Although we just discovered that we're able to go, because initially the ferry company, Calmac, phoned us up and cancelled the booking because they said on the 11th of July it's essential travel only. So I told them I'm a whiskey lover. Of course it's essential. So they've allowed us to travel on the 11th, but they say they can't guarantee my return booking a week later. So I may be trapped on Islay forever.
Oh, gee, what a shame. That would be tragic, I think.
Well, I think I could cope.
We have a comment from Catherine Sakura. Robin, don't retire before I can get to Scotland. Looking forward to that new CD. Let's talk about that, because one of the things you did during lockdown was lay down some more music, right?
Well, the truth is, Mark, I recorded the songs for this CD in January, but it took, because of lockdown and everybody stopping work, it took quite a while for me to get the thing actually produced. I have it now. It arrived 2 days ago. My new CD, Holding Gold. It's a mix of songs. There's a couple of whiskey songs on there, and a few songs that are about other things entirely. But I'm a songwriter, and I don't only write songs about whiskey. I write songs about all kinds of weird things. So all these weird things are represented in the CD.
And it becomes available at your website next week, correct?
Well, I'll have information about it on the website next week. I'm not very good with techie stuff, so I don't think I'll be able to, for a while anyway, I won't be able to sell it on the website, but I'll get distribution sorted out, and I'm out of touch with these things because it's been a few years since my last CD, and you forget, all the things that you have to do. You should have a whole list and tick them off. And I've been suffering 3 months of lockdown laziness and lethargy.
I hear that. Well,
It's easy.
Let's see what comments we have coming in here. Graham Fraser asks if I'm still looking for a whiskey-themed mask. Actually, I found the fabric for it that I've got on order that my daughter will turn into a mask when it arrives, because there's a company here in the States that has masks with whiskey glasses in an alternating pattern on them, all full. And I don't have the image of it here to show you right now, but I will have it when the time comes, and it will be there. Is that a Cavalan mask, Billy? I thought I recognized the logo. We can't understand you. Okay, yep, that's a Cavalan mask. Let's take that full screen so people can see it better, Billy. Put that back on.
Don't have nightmares, folks.
Yep, see? Yeah. And I will take
the joys of a Cavalan mask there. Now, they sent these out shortly after lockdown started. But yes, unfortunately, it's not quite the look I'd hoped for. So
it doesn't come with an insert where you can actually put the straw in and get a little bit of whiskey in there too, right?
Oh, it's only small, so you poke the straw up the middle. I practiced with that already. Don't worry, it's the first thing I did.
Hey Billy, I have a question for you. Is that a bottle of Buckfast I see behind you?
It's next to my bottle of Iron Brew as well. So yeah, there's only a little bit of Buckfast left. Lockdown's been hard on it. So
yeah, I live in South Lanarkshire, and Buckfast is extremely popular here. All the young guys drink it. So maybe that's what I should go for, a mask with Buckfast.
Yeah, go. I'm sure there's that. If you hop into Glasgow in a couple of weeks' time, I'm fairly certain you'll be able to find a Buckfast mask somewhere. Someone would have made one.
I have to get something. I don't have any mask yet.
Have the monks gotten back to making Bucky yet? I know they stopped for a bit.
I think they've announced how they're going to start up again. But no, the reason why I have this bottle in here is I ended up doing lots of chatting with whiskey people in Glasgow. And so after there was announced of a Glasgow wine shortage of Bucky, I decided to make sure I had a bottle in the background every time I called them up. So,
and we have
Do we believe him?
I have seen at least 2 people in our area that turned Crown Royal bags into masks. I'm not sure how effective they are, but and yeah, they've taken the fabric from those and turned them into masks. And comment from our pal Ed Patrick up in Toronto. Robin, he hasn't seen you in Toronto in many years. If you're not flying to anywhere in Europe, we're not going to see you in Canada anytime soon, are we?
Unfortunately, I don't think so. Nobody asks me these days, and I gave up organising tours of the folk clubs in Ontario years ago. I'd love to come back sometime, but there's nothing planned.
People are telling us what they have in their glasses. Bill Ricker's going to open his Royal Brackla 12 tonight and toast the Scottish play that must not be named. I'm assuming that refers to a certain Scottish author who's been in the headlines recently. Petehead, David Owen says he never mixes his whiskey, maybe sometimes with a bit of water, but never mixes anything that he actually wants to drink. Trapian, I saw somebody invented a mask with a small protected opening for a straw. Works for me. Travis Adams, music is healing in these lonely times. I've found whiskey and music to be a great weekend calming, of course. And Greg would agree with that. Also, Graham Fraser asks, are you going to merchandise your mask, Mark? No, we're not. No, because I'm not the one who's going to sew it. I'm not the one who would have to package them up, ship them out, and do all that stuff. And I have too much to do without having to do retail. So we also have a question for you, Robin, from Charles Tower. Love the Speyside Whiskey song. Do you sing it from memory, or do you need to have the words in front of you?
Oh, I sing it from memory, but that is quite a tricky one to remember. If I haven't sung it for a few months, like over lockdown, then you can never be confident that the words will fall into place. There's a lot of words and a lot of whiskey distillery names in there.
So, Richard, tell us what you've been doing trying to explore wine and champagne and all these other things while you've been dealing with the lockdown and cheating on us with all those other spirits and drinks.
Well, I've always kind of dabbled in that stuff anyway, Mark, because when I was at scotchwhiskey.com, it was only ever a part-time gig. So I've always been a bit of an all-rounder, I guess. And since that closed, then I've gone back a bit to wine and champagne and the business side of things as well. And obviously, since lockdown, what articles have been commissioned have all been about COVID and the impact on the drinks industry and how that's going to affect us all in the months and years to come. And 2 things I think I've learned. Well, the first one is that nobody really knows anything in terms of predicting the future. And the second is how adaptable everybody is. Even in this really terrifying situation, people find a way of getting through and making do, whether they're individuals or businesses. I think I'm a great believer in the human race being incredibly adaptable in these difficult times.
What do you guys think the impact is going to be on tourism? We know that Nicola Sturgeon has been saying, don't come up north to Scotland right now. We're still not ready for you. And the distilleries are gradually starting to reopen, or at least some of them are. Any idea what the impact is going to be on tourism on Scotland this year, on the industry? Because a lot of the distilleries had really started investing in it in recent years to try to make some revenue and make some money off of tourism. And if you can't do it this year, that's going to put some people in a bind.
Yeah. And I think it will come back, Mark. I think it will take time. But the kind of distillery tours that most people really enjoy are in-depth, hands-on. You really get into the process and you get to see the people. And I don't think anybody can do that right now. So my understanding is distillers are looking at different ways of doing things where you're socially distanced and you have one-way systems and all that kind of thing. And until there's a vaccine, I don't think we can go back to the way things were and the kind of really fun, hands-on distillery tours that we've probably all enjoyed over the years.
We want to welcome our friends in Tasmania, Gary, and some of our other folks who like to watch from Australia and New Zealand, where it's Saturday morning over there right now. And Ricker points out, no, the Scottish play refers to the thespian superstition that one doesn't name Shakespeare's play about the Thane of Cawdor, landlord of Bracklaw. Okay, I'm not familiar with that one, but then we'll go on from there.
And unfortunately, Mark, we can't tell you the name of the play because that's the entire point.
Yes.
So,
if you told us the name of the play, you'd have to kill us, right?
It'll be very unlucky for all of us, and we have to sing some ridiculous songs. So we don't want that. There's an episode of Blackadder all about it. Don't worry.
Billy, how has things been going at the exchange in terms of dealing with the pandemic? Because we keep hearing about online sales going through the roof. I'm not sure if you can tell us how things have been, but what do you know?
The thing I can tell you, unfortunately, I'm not allowed to give out sales figures because they won't tell me the sales figures because they know I'll probably tell people the sales figures. But what I can say, it's been really busy. It's going back towards normal again now as people are getting back towards normal. But we saw a huge spike as soon as lockdown came in. The things people were buying were different. You know, lots of things changed. And it's great for us. It means we've been able to build up our ranges of different things. So we're selling a lot more wine. So we have a lot more interesting wine now. We sold a lot more beer, which meant I was allowed to talk about beer on the internet, which is always nice because I quite like beer. But people were buying just across the board more stuff. And the thing which I'm seeing a little bit of now, not so much through us, but through some anecdotal evidence from people online, is that people have saved a lot of money during lockdown, which is a strange thing, but people not traveling, people not having to sort of like have that outlay when you're working from home and they're not used to it, means some people have saved enough money to start investing that in whiskey again. So we're seeing the value of bottles that people are buying going up, but also auctions are doing very well. And so it's this very weird sort of thing of sales went up for online retailers, but at the same time, our shop shut and all of our bar trade disappeared and everything like that. And now that's coming back, sales coming down, and everybody's splashing money on nice shiny things so they've saved a bit of cash and not having to catch the train every day. So it's a really interesting time, and it's just been one of constant adaptation at work. We're really seeing how things go from week to week and seeing what we need to do and how we can best serve people with what they're trying to buy.
Robin, how has the lockdown been for you in terms of putting a dent in your whiskey stockpile at home?
Actually, I had an entire month, the month of June, without any alcohol at all. I think I embraced the holiday spirit in April and May a little bit too much. The weather was great, and it just felt like I was on holiday all the time. So I found my consumption of whiskey and wine and beer going up. So I thought, okay, it's time to take a break. So I had no alcohol in June. But now, of course, we're into July. And next week I go on holiday for real, and I'm going to Islay. Right. So I can imagine that the whiskey consumption next week will go up and up and up. I'm taking my wife with me, though. She'll make sure that I'm under reasonable control.
She's driving, right?
Yeah. Well, she'll drive me to, I don't know, the distraction. I'm not. But it's a funny thing about this lockdown, that it's been bad for some people and good for other people. We're talking about the whiskey shops. If you have a whiskey shop, you've had to close. If you have a whiskey website, you're doing fine. If you're lucky enough to have both, then the one compensates for the other. I think it's going to continue to be like that. The companies in restaurants and pubs, for example, the ones that can manage the cash flow, if they have a bit of reserves, they'll do okay. The ones that have more space and can allow social distancing inside, or have a beer garden, it's like in the old days when they stopped people smoking in the pubs. If you had a beer garden, you could cope because people could smoke outside. If you're a city centre pub with no beer garden, people didn't come anymore, so you went out of business. Always winners and losers. And I think with the whiskey production, I can't see that coronavirus or the lockdown could really make any difference to whiskey production. If Winston Churchill felt it was an essential industry, then I'm sure we could argue the same now. and social distancing in a whiskey distillery is not difficult, but it's the visitor centres that are hit. They're closed, or when they open up again, it will be tricky for them. But I'm not sure that the whiskey visitor centres actually make that much money for the whiskey companies. I think it's the production that makes the money for them.
Oh yeah, but it's every little bit counts these days.
And
yeah, and it brings the tourists as well, you know.
Sorry, I think if you're a newer distillery as well, then you are looking to visitors. If you're waiting for whiskey to mature, then the tourists can bring in some money while you're waiting for that to happen. So I think it's tricky for those guys, the newer people.
And there's a lot of them around.
Yeah,
like Billy's neighbors at Bimber.
indeed.
Yeah, those guys there are. I popped over to see them the other day. They did the launch, and they dropped my bottle of whiskey off. I popped around to drop off some samples and pick up some samples from them, and there was lots of sort of like, you know, waving at a distance and pseudo fist bumping at a distance as they wandered around the distillery trying to pack up boxes to send them out. So small team, small distillery. Sort of just trying to negotiate that, but they've had to shut down all their tours because, again, tiny distillery. They've got a little bar at the front, and the distillery itself is just a small warehouse. Trying to sort of turn that into something which can open up again is a challenge. And there's lots of, especially you're saying with the newer distilleries, because that's one of their main revenue sources while they're getting up to speed. Often they're not always the biggest of distilleries as well, which makes things more interesting. But this is the thing you're sort of saying about restaurants. It's one of the things in ties in what Richard was saying about people being quite sort of like inventive of what they're doing. The pivots we've seen, the people turning around and doing something a little bit different. So the folks in restaurants are now doing takeaway where they didn't before. My favourite one so far is Dish Hoon, which is an Indian restaurant in London and around. They're famous for doing bacon naans. So it's a naan bread filled with bacon and chili chutney and they're absolutely fantastic. They're now selling bacon naan kits that you can order to arrive on a certain day. So I've got 2 days of whiskey judging on Wednesday and Thursday next week. So my bacon naan kit turns up on Tuesday. So I can have a bacon naan on the Wednesday and Thursday to get me ready for a day of whiskey judging. So there's little things like that where people have taken what they do and then turned it into a business to continue during lockdown. It's really impressive to see the inventiveness.
So what whiskey judging are you doing?
It's the Spirits Masters World, Irish, and American whiskey judging. So the Whiskey Masters have continued on through lockdown by doing sessions over Zoom. So I've been informed that I'll have a large number of bottles wrapped up in grey plastic, so I can't see what they are, turning up on a Tuesday morning and being collected on Wednesday evening, along with a couple of crates of glasses to make sure I have something to drink out of. It's going to be interesting. So I'm really looking forward to that, see how it goes.
One question we get a lot around these on these webcasts is, what's the most interesting whiskey you've tried recently? And let's go around and we'll start with you, Richard. What's the most interesting new one that you've tried for the first time recently?
Well, first of all, I have to say I haven't tried that many new whiskies recently, mainly because the kind of tasting activities you'd normally be doing have been curtailed slightly. I did try, it's been sitting there for a while. I tried the Ardbeg Wee Beastie the other day, which I was quite intrigued by, because I thought it was quite kind of ballsy for them to put a whiskey out at 5, saying it's 5 years old anyway. And I thought it was interesting enough, but I'd probably stick to the 10 for my kind of core Ardbeg dram and so on. But it was just good to taste something of that age, not pretending to be anything else. And I'm trying to think what else really. That's been the main one. I've also got, it's not actually a whiskey yet, but I've got a Macnean kind of whiskey in progress, their latest version of what they might be producing once it gets beyond 3 years. I'm yet to try that, but I'm quite intrigued to try that because having tried some of the stuff they've done earlier, it's looking pretty good, I think. But I'm sure Billy has got a lot more things he can talk about.
Billy?
Not really, actually. It's a bit of I've tried lots of little bits of strangeness. Nothing's really jumped out as a thing I absolutely love. You know, again, I got the Wee Beastie. I have that sitting here ready for me to write some tasting notes on it. But I tried the Macmillan Bronte, the green tea, McMurray cask thing, which is one of the most silly whiskies I've ever tried when it comes to the way it was made. It involves steeping green tea of a variety of different types in neutral spirit, then mixing that neutral spirit with sherry, and then using the sherry to season casks before you put whiskey in it, which just seems to be the most ridiculous way of getting a green tea flavour into a whiskey. But I know Angela from McMurray, and it sounds entirely like the sort of thing that she would do. So it makes sense from that point of view. But just trying to look, see what I've got here. I think the most interesting one, this is around the beginning of lockdown, was the Redbreast 27. I know Mark and I were discussing this the other day, which is probably my favourite whiskey of the last year. And it's one of those things where I also had this with the Lefroy Kerchis, most recent Lefroy Isle of Festival bottling, which is it uses port and wine casks, and the Redbreast has got a load of port casks in there. And I don't like whiskey from port casks and wine casks as a rule. But people are now starting to use them in a much more subtle way and much more interesting ways. And the Redbreast 27 and the Kerchis both, they're not just a big whack of port cask. And so for me, who doesn't really get on with that style of whiskey, there's some really interesting things at the moment. People using more nuanced approaches to interesting casks, which are the things I'm trying to keep an eye on at the moment.
And Greg Serafian in Paris is curious about that McNean. What more do you know about it?
I haven't tasted it yet, so not much.
Okay.
I'll let you know once I've tried it.
How they're spelling it now. So they know they've changed their spelling every now and again. So.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think the apostrophe is correct there, isn't it?
It's there now, yes, cool.
Yeah.
They were Nook and Ian, and now they're Nook and Ian. So.
Right. I think people thought it was two people called Nick and Ian before.
And Greg wants to know if that Grand Thé is good too.
The Grand, I wrote it's up on my own website, spiritedmatters.com. It's one of those ones where it's really interesting, and I really like the idea of it, but it doesn't quite hit the height I would have expected from it. But at the same time, my comment on it was I really want to try batch 2, because this is a really weird and experimental process, and this is something they're obviously sort of like playing with. That's the first run. The first run's pretty good. I think the second run is going to be really good. So I'm just waiting for that second run to come out. Inevitably, it will come along, I think. So
we want to acknowledge Monique Houston just jumped in and says, "Happy Friday, great crew." And those of you who know Monique is a brand ambassador in the U.S. may also know her in her previous career at the Dundee Dell in Omaha, where she ran the whiskey program there. And we got word today that the Dundee Dell will be closing its doors at the end of the month because of the coronavirus and not being able to come back. And that's just one of the really sad things that we're seeing a lot of. Is we're seeing a lot of bars and probably a few craft distilleries that are not going to come back from this. And Robin, before I get to ask that question about bars and things like, we didn't get a chance to get your opinion. Have you tried anything new recently before you did your month of dryness in June?
Well, not very much. Being a penniless songwriter, I don't spend a lot of money on whiskey. So it's either whiskey that sometimes I get paid for my services in whiskey, or indeed I see a lot of whiskey through my job on the tasting panel for the Scotch Malt Whisky Society. The most recent whiskey, of course, is this one, the Robin Laing Bogeyman Inspiration. This is the 5th of a series of Bruichladdich casks that are have my name and usually my face on them. So it's quite cool to have your face or your information on a whiskey bottle. And this is the first time it's been a smoky one, because it's a Port Charlotte from a port cask. The very first one was from a port cask. In fact, 3 of them have been from port casks and 2 from sherry. So a little bit differently from you, Billy, I'm a sucker for pink whiskey. I love what happens to whiskey, or what can happen to whiskey, because it isn't always good in a good port or red wine cask. And I'm loving this one. I have to say, it's I never thought I would go to the Port Charlotte, the dark side, from Bruichladdich, but I am loving it. And interestingly, one of the nicest whiskies I tasted recently was a a peated Benriach from the 1970s. And there's a whole story about the history of Benriach peated whiskey. But I've never tasted until fairly recently a couple of different ones from 1972, I think, and 76. And they're fantastic whiskies. I remember once being lucky enough to taste a 40-year-old Bowmore. It was in Tokyo. And somehow when I tasted this Benriach, all these flavors and suggestions came right back to me. So I'm very pleased about that. From the society, I've had a couple of drams that knock out my sort of prejudices, and we all have these little prejudices, And one of them was Inchmurrin, which is from Loch Lomond Distillery. And years ago, I tasted a few Loch Lomond whiskies, and I was not terribly impressed. But I have to tell you, in the last couple of years, they've been bringing out some fantastic stuff. Inchmurrin samples that we've had, especially now that the society is finishing whiskies, which for many years it refused to do, but it is now finishing them in interesting casks and wood management and so on. And I think some of the Inchmurrins have been amazing. And also, I'm a bit of a snob about Scotch whiskey being, the best in the world. But we had some samples from Cavallan, from bourbon and sherry cask, and they were a knockout as well. And I was hoping that the society would bottle those casks, but it turns out that they're not going to bottle them. So I don't have to write the tasting notes. I just have to sit and enjoy the samples all by myself.
Greg Serafian had a question for you on that Port Charlotte. Did you get to help select that, or did they select it and then put your picture on the label?
The very first one was selected by me and Jim McEwen. We went round the warehouse and sampled a number of whiskies, and he knew that I liked the ones from red wine casks and so on. So we were sampling 20-year-old Latour, Lafitte, and so on. And then he showed me these port hogsheads that were 7 years old. And I said, these are going to be much cheaper. They're just as good, and they were made by you. They weren't made by the previous people. So that's the one. And that was the first Bruichladdich inspiration. So I really had a hand, in staggering around the warehouse, selecting the cask for that one. Subsequently, the other ones have been either from Malts of Scotland or from my friend Gunther Sommer in Switzerland. And in those cases, I get 3 or 4 samples and I decide which one is the one that I like. And so I was a bit surprised, as I say, that the last time one of the samples was Port Charlotte instead of Bruichladdich, and I just knew right away it was the one, because I'm not a great peated whiskey lover. I mean, I like them at the end of the evening or after a meal, but to me they're not really session whiskies,
I have to ask you.
I like other kinds.
Go ahead. I'm sorry, Robin. Go ahead.
No, it's okay.
I have to ask you to take us inside one of the tasting sessions for the Scotch Malt Whisky Society, because those are somewhat legendary. With you, Charlie McLean, Annabelle was in there for a while, and some other folks. What's it like around that tasting table when you guys are tasting for the society in person as opposed to in lockdown?
Well, it has changed over the years. I mean, I've been doing this job at the society. I say job, I'm freelance, of course. I don't work for the society. It's a freelance post, just like Charlie McLean. Chairing the tasting panel over a number of years. In fact, I've been doing it for over 20 years, maybe 22, 23 years now. And certainly Charlie McLean was my mentor. He was the guy in charge when I first was involved, and I learned a lot from him. But over the years, we've changed the format, we've changed the style. We used to have maybe 6 or 7 people in a tasting panel, and chairing it really was an important job, because otherwise it's the loudest person who gets to have his or her say. And then you have to distill a tasting note from all the things that half a dozen half-drunken people are saying and sometimes speaking at the same time. So that was quite tricky. But in recent years, we've made it a bit more professional. It's smaller groups. It's usually 2 or 3, normally 3 people, and we try to get through the things, through the whiskey samples efficiently and quickly, and we no longer stop for biscuits and cheese halfway through. It's it's not a party anymore. In the early days with Charlie, it could easily turn into a party, a shindig, but now it's a much more professional job of work, and that's important because I think the society has grown so much, and they have so many members now, and they have so many samples to get through. So we need, I suppose, a number of little teams that work on it.
Who came up with the tasting note? The Ursula Andress in a wetsuit or something like that, the legendary one from very early on in the society days, back one of the James Bond movie reference. Were you involved in that one?
I don't remember that one. And that doesn't necessarily mean anything because I don't remember very many. Yeah, there have been some interesting titles in the past, and I think that's still the case. The people who write these notes, there are about 4 of us at the moment who write the notes, and we try to make it, accurate, informative. Of course, you don't want to misrepresent the whiskey, and sometimes that means that if there's something maybe slightly negative hidden in there, you have to highlight it. It can't all be negative or it wouldn't have passed the panel, but things can be subjective, but we try to make the tasting notes also entertaining and fun. That's a really important part of the society. So you have the little tasting note that goes on the bottle, you have the title, and we usually have a lot of fun with that, weird references or puns or whatever. And then there's the main tasting note, usually about 100 words, that goes into the magazine or the outturn. Because most of these bottles are bought, by mail order. So people do want to read what other folk have had to say about it.
Billy, Richard, I know you guys have both written bunches of tasting notes over the years too. It really is an art form to write a good tasting note, isn't it?
Yeah, there's loads of different approaches. I was trying to dig out my wallet, but this is my SNWS members kit when I joined about 12 years ago, 13 years ago, something like that, which is around the time I started writing tasting notes. So I've been sort of quite inspired by the way the SNWS have written their notes over the years. And I try, and I've been criticised for writing, over-the-top flowery wine tasting notes for whiskey, and my answer to that is yes, that's what I do. It's as Robin was saying, you want to make the note fun. If you want to do a utilitarian note, you can do that as well. Perfectly sort of able to sort of strip it back to its bare bones. But it all depends on what you're trying to do. It's like with any writing, it's all about the intention and the story and what you want to give people from it. But I really enjoy writing totally over the top, totally stupid tasting notes if I possibly can.
Richard?
Yeah, I'm totally with Billy on that. I mean, you are trying to inform people, but you've got to try to entertain as well. Otherwise, I think you're just going to turn people off. So, yes, I think at times it can go a little bit too far, and I know I've done that in the past, but that's part of the fun of it and part of the fun of reading those notes, I hope.
My usual pushback, the only pushback I ever get is from upstairs. I'll write a tasting note and they'll go, "What were you thinking? Where did you get that from?" And I'm going, "That's what I get." And the one I catch hell for most is driftwood campfire smoke. You get that smoke of the little salty smokiness from a driftwood campfire.
Yeah.
And they'll go, "When did you ever smell a driftwood campfire?" And I'm going, on Isla, guys, when I was traveling. Give me a break. Come on. We have a comment from Travis Adams. His favorite society dram was Wench with a Wrench. It sold itself with that name.
That was mine.
That was yours?
Yeah.
Tell us about it.
Actually, I might be able to find it out.
We sometimes get carried away.
Was whiskey flavored condoms and skunk roadkill? Was that one of yours?
That was mine. Yeah.
Oh, thank you very much. The name put so many people off the whiskey that I managed to get a lot of it before it sold out. So thank you very much. Really good whiskey.
It took a long time to sell that one because it was from a sherry cask, as you might imagine, and there were at least 500 or 600 bottles to get through. And I mean, the funny thing is, whiskey flavored condoms and skunk roadkill, people would buy a dram at the bar and give it to their friends just for a laugh. And it wasn't that bad. I
really enjoyed it. I ended up buying a bottle of it the first time I tried it, and I was surprised it kept on being there when I went back to society. I think I went through 3 or 4 bottles in the end. But I remember right at the end, there was a special offer on the website of buy any other bottle of whiskey and get a bottle of that for 15 quid.
It was a classic. It wasn't a classic whiskey, but it was a classic title. But I think I wouldn't get away with that now. You know, they've got this idea of the house style and the corporate rules, and you don't want to upset anybody. You know, we've had situations in the past where we mentioned some celebrity in the title, and they weren't happy about it. You know, so it's all a bit more controlled now. We have editors who will make sure that we don't transgress any boundaries of good taste and propriety. So we have to behave ourselves, but we still push the boundary all the time.
Greg is asking, so was it rubbery? I'm assuming that's why you named it what you did.
Well, of course it was, and of course people always ask me, how do you know what whiskey flavored condoms taste like? I use my imagination.
So I got to ask, did you guys ever come up with titles or tasting notes that the society said, no, we're not putting that on a bottle? And if so, can you give us an example of a couple of them?
I haven't had many rejections at all. I think I've probably mellowed like a good whiskey as I got older. So it's the young guys, they get things slapped back all the time. I think there was one recently that was Mile High Cream Pie in the Sky or something like that. I thought that would get stopped, but it didn't. So wasn't mine. That wasn't me. Not guilty.
Not guilty on that one. Okay. Good question here coming in from Graham Fraser, or this brings up a good question. He just opened a new bottle of 4-year-old single cask, single grain from North British in Virgin Oak. Now, I've made the argument for years that this time of the year where it's hotter than hell outside, we're pushing 30 degrees today here in New Jersey, that single grains are a great alternative to single malts or bourbons in hot weather. Would you guys go along with that theory?
Yeah, very much so. Something like that, especially a 4-year-old Virgin Oak North British. North British is normally a slightly bigger, fatter spirit than other grain distilleries. That's basically a 4-year-old Scottish bourbon. I don't think they're using corn at the distillery at the moment, but apart that the raw materials and the flavour not being the same. If you put that aside, it's very much the same sort of idea as something like that. That's the sort of thing that I drink at this time of year with some ice in it when nobody's watching, so I don't get told off by the whiskey people for putting ice in my whiskey.
Yeah, I mean, this is a day like this. If I were outside, I'd be tempted to maybe throw just 1 cube in just to cool it off a little bit for hydration purposes only.
No, we had a hot day last month. One hot day. Today was pushing 13 degrees here, and we had umbrellas up. But last month we had a hot day, and I put 1 ice cube in my 16-year-old Port Charlotte sitting in the garden, and it was fantastic. And I know that people say all sorts of things about what you should and shouldn't put in your whiskey. If you buy it, you do what you like. That's what I say. And I agree that North British is often quite bourbon-like. And if I drink bourbon, I'm nearly always going to put ice in it. And I don't think it matters whether it's a 4-year-old North British or a 34-year-old North British. It's going to taste a little bit like bourbon, and if you want to stick ice in it, that's fine. I didn't know they'd stopped using corn, Billy. I wrote a book about North British a few years ago when they were 125 years old, and they told me that they'd been set up to use corn, and it would be too difficult for them to change In fact, Diageo asked them
which
to
grains
change.
they all use. So I say, yeah, if they're using corn, even more so, definitely like bourbon.
Yeah, well, you don't know how much of it gets into the final flavor when you're distilling to 94.5, but you can imagine it does.
Yeah, definitely. So
I think they're still using corn. I was there about 4 or 5 years ago, and I think they were then. So.
I can never remember what grains the various different grain distilleries are using. I've got a friend of mine who's writing a book about grain whiskey, and I get told off by him because I get it wrong all the time when we talk about it. But yeah, I need to get myself a little chart, post up by my monitor where nobody can see it, so I can look like I know what I'm talking about.
We have a question from Graham Fraser. There seems to have been an explosion of virtual tastings with samples during lockdown. Does the panel think this will continue after COVID? Billy, you've been leading a lot of these and organizing a lot of them through the Whiskey Exchange. Is this going to become a permanent thing to do virtual tastings instead of trying to fly a master distiller or a brand ambassador all over hell and back trying to do these things?
I think we're going to see them as a permanent fixture of a lineup, not the entire menu. We're not going to only have virtual tastings, but I'm fairly sure. I know the Whiskey Exchange we're planning, we're putting into place. At the moment, it's not entirely ad hoc. We have our own way of doing things now. We sort of learn how to do virtual tastings as we've gone along. But we're putting into place stuff where we can just continue doing these for as long as we need to, as long as we want to as well. People really enjoying them. It's one of these ones where, the tasting that Mark was leading last night, we had a Zoom room full of people who were all enthusiastically joining in. We had people on Facebook watching as well. It wasn't like a regular tasting, but it's another option. And so especially for people who can't get to tastings, and this is one of the things, again, talking about the SNWS, I know there are many SNWS members who can't get to the members' rooms, can't get to local tastings. So the SNWS are doing a load of virtual tastings at the moment, and people who have never managed to get to SNWS events are now having hosted events where they're learning about the whiskey, speaking to other people. Yeah, I think we're going to see a lot more of it. And also, the thing I'm really looking forward to is seeing what happens next. See, at the moment, we're just doing a certain type of tasting. We've seen that tweaked and changed slightly over lockdown. Lockdown's accelerated a lot of the adoption of online stuff, and people are really clever. People are coming up with new things. So I'm looking at what the next thing is, the next step in the world of virtual tasting, what it's going to be, because it's really exciting seeing how things are changing at the moment.
Richard, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think Billy's right. I think it's that old thing about necessity being the mother of invention. People have learned to be so much more nimble and technically adept with these things now. And I've done a few of these online tastings, and they work. They're not a replacement for being in the room with the person and with the other people. But as Billy said, if you can't be there, it's a great way of doing it. You get the information, you get to try the liquid, you get to interact with the people who make it, hopefully. So I think it will continue. I don't think it's going to replace what we were all doing before, but it's a really good add-on to that.
And a comment from Gordon Homer. Cheers, Robin. I still have my North British book. You wrote the history of North British a few years ago, didn't you?
Yeah, every 25 years, the distillery has produced a book. And when they were 125 years old, they asked me to do it. And it was quite good fun, although they gave me access to some of their staff, and especially their retired staff, so that I could get all the dirt, all the inside stories and everything. And when I put all those in the manuscript for the first draft, the managing director came along and said, well, it makes good reading, but I don't think we want this in there. I don't think we want that in there. So I had to bowdlerize it a little bit, but it was good fun. And it's great to find out how a grain distillery works. And it's I grew up in the same street as that distillery when I was a kid in Gorgie. So, I grew up with the smell. It was very nostalgic for me.
Tell us about that smell. What was it like? Because we all know what a malt distillery smells like, if you've ever been around one, but not everybody knows what a grain distillery smells like.
North British is very challenged because it's city centre location, and they have spent millions of pounds on smell abatement, or whatever you want to call it, where they try to get rid of the smell because local people complain about it. Actually, many people like the smell. You drive into Edinburgh on the city bypass, not the bypass, the approach road into the centre, and you always get that smell. Actually, it's not coming so much from the distillery, it's coming from the dark grains plant where they process the residue. And that's the reason, really, why they don't find it easy to change from processing, making whiskey out of corn or maize, because the whole plant was set up to make animal feed out of the residue from the corn. And if they change to wheat, it screws up the machinery, something terrible. So that's probably why they'll stick with, well, as long as they're in that location. City centre is not an easy location for a big distillery like that.
Greg Serafian was wondering if there might be an uncensored version of that book floating around somewhere. You ever think about
I have a few copies of it left, or I'm sure the distillery has copies that they never. It was never for sale. It was only for giving away to their visitors and reps and VIPs, and so there are some copies kicking around, and I have a few left. So a deal could be done.
A deal can be done. Okay. RobinLaing.com. You guys know where to go to reach out to Robin and find out about that. Robin, I did not ask you if you wanted to sing or anything, but we've had requests. If you have a song you'd love to do from the new CD, if you want to do one, feel free to take us out tonight.
Well, I'm not sure about that. I'm out of practice a little bit because of the lockdown, and I don't have my guitar handy, but I could maybe do one without the guitar. Not from the new CD. This was one that I wanted to put on my last CD, but the publishers wouldn't allow me to do it because I changed the words of the original song.
And Catherine wants you to tell her about your new book, which she's enjoying so much. You have a new book out too, right?
My last book is Whiskey Muse 2. My first whiskey book was called The Whiskey Muse, and it was a collection of songs and poems about whiskey, all from Scotland. This one is all songs and poems again about whiskey, but they're all written by me. So it's takes the theme, runs forward with the thread, but it's different. I like to do things differently. The book I'm working on at the moment is not about whiskey at all. It's poems about Scottish castles. But the song shall I give the song now to finish up? Is that
sure?
Okay?
Go ahead, and we'll finish up after that. Let me take the full screen here. If you want to do an a cappella version, that's great.
Okay. Well, maybe you can see if you can recognize what the original song was. But I changed the words, and the publisher didn't think it was a good idea for me to record it, so it's not available on any CD. But it's well, I won't even tell you the title. I don't know if it has a title, but it's a kind of a prayer. It goes like this: Lord, won't you buy me a Mercedes-Benz? A great big stretch limo with room for all my friends, and a bar in the back full of good malts and blends. Oh Lord, won't you buy me a Mercedes-Benz? Hey Lord, won't you buy me a night on the town? My friends are all wusses, they always let me down. So prove that you love me and buy the next round. Oh Lord, won't you buy me a night on the town? Hey Lord, won't you buy me a bottle of Black Bowmore? Just you and me, Lord, we'll double lock the door. The devil will be jealous, but him we can ignore. Oh Lord, won't you buy me a bottle of Black Bowmore? Then, Lord, won't you buy me my own whiskey cask? You say you can do anything, I'm taking you to task. A barrel or a hoggy, That's the last thing I'll ask. Oh Lord, won't you buy me my own whiskey cask? In fact, Lord, why won't you buy me a whole distillery? My liver might suffer, but my soul will be set free, and I'll be in heaven if you make it all tax-free. Oh Lord, won't you buy me a whole distillery? Lord, won't you buy me a whole distillery just for me? Yeah. Thanks to Janis Joplin for the inspiration.
Yeah, well, Janice was a whiskey drinker too. She had drank Jack Daniels, as I recall, so that's kind of appropriate. And we just had one other quick question for you before you started singing about Dave Kuhn bought your copy of his copy of Whiskey Legends of Islay at the Celtic House gift shop in Bowmore. Do you have a favorite story in there?
Oh, a favorite story. Lots of them. And the picture on the cover, I have a copy here actually. The picture on the cover is a stylized version of Martine Nuet. Martine calls herself a silky, you know. She thinks she's a silky seal that comes seductively from the sea to the land and seduces the men and so on. I don't think she does that, but anyway, that's Martine. But I think my favorite story in the book is one that I made up. It's called Uncle Wolf, and it's a story set on Islay. It was inspired by an Italian folktale from a book by Italo Calvino, and I love this because it's the story of Uncle Wolf and the little girl. It's like Little Red Riding Hood, you know. She goes tripping along with a basket of goodies for Uncle Wolf, but she gets hungry on the way and she eats all the goodies, and when she gets to Uncle Wolf's door, there's nothing left, so he eats her. I love stories where the kids get eaten.
Well, you got to keep the dark humor in there just to keep the kids honest, and otherwise they just grow up with this just complete fantasy idea of what life is, unicorns and rainbows, right?
Yeah, and they think they're important, you know.
Well, let's close it out, guys. Hang on just a split second here while I say goodbye to everybody. Don't forget to join us on the Whiskey Wednesday webcast. Once again, we will have Brendan McCarran from Ardbeg and Glenmorangie, the head of whiskey maturing stocks, Bill Lumsden's number 2 and his heir apparent. And we will also have George Grant joining us from Glenfarclas again, weather permitting this time around. We'll have the WhiskyCast podcast again this weekend, even though it's a holiday weekend here in the U.S. We work 7 days a week. Let's just be honest about it. It's what happens when you're having fun. And I hope you've had fun the last hour or so. Thanks again to our guests, the one and only Robin Laing, Richard Woodard, and Billy Abbott. And we will see you on the Whiskey Wednesday webcast next time around. Hey, be safe this weekend. If you're going out in public, wear the damn mask, for crying out loud. We got to take care of each other, and the only way we're going to get rid of this stupid virus is if we all wear a mask and take care of each other. Sláinte mhath, take care. Have a great weekend, all.